Can everyone hear this okay? Yeah. My name is Lynn Geisinger. I'm the moderator. This is Thursday, April 12th at 12:30. This is a panel entitled, I'm Not Bossy, I'm the Boss. And it runs from 12:30 to 1:40 in the UMC Center Ballroom, and it's panel number 4205. I have the pleasure of introducing this group of women. I've been moderating for a number of years, and this is just an incredibly talented and creative group of women, and they're all very nice, too. And the panel name, just to sort of set the stage, was a Sinead O'Connor album in 2014, and it's been adopted by Sheryl Sandberg and others as a movement to ban the use of the word bossy, ban bossy, as a way of teaching young girls and educating people not to use that as a derogatory term. I am the owner of a business here in town, and I'm also a candidate for the RTD board for District O, which covers Boulder County, most of Boulder County. Thanks. I want to read you quickly how you can submit questions. We take questions in both the CWA app and a note card system. To ask a question in the app, you simply select this session in the schedule, tap Q&A, and then insert and send your question. I am getting to my moderator access there. Got to finish that. You may also raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers. You must write legibly. If you're a student, please note this in your question, and I'm very happy to see all these students coming in. Where are you from? Where? I can't hear that. Summit Middle School.
All right.
Welcome. We're happy to have you here.
Awesome.
Make your questions brief and to the point. They should all be questions, please. Our panel, I'm going to go in order here, and they're going to Bonnie Burton is our first speaker. In addition to her many accomplishments at Lucasfilms and writing for Wired and many other magazines and books, Bonnie Burton is a graduate of CU Boulder, where she was, yeah, I know, we love that.
I know, I actually graduated. They gave me a diploma and everything.
Not only a diploma, but in two things, English and journalism. And she was also program director of the radio station here and editor of the Campus Press newspaper. Our second speaker is Charlie Oliver. Charlie has, again, has many accomplishments. If you haven't read their biographies, you ought to go back and take a look. They're very interesting. Her most recent project is Tech 2025, which brings tech innovations to the general public. And she has podcasts and blogs talking about, explaining to the general public things like chatbots and artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency and lots of things that I think many people are looking for explanations of. And finally, our speaker is Erin Velarde, who has started a group of nonprofits called Vote, Run, Lead that came out of the White House Project. And she said yesterday in one of the panels, I'll just steal one little piece of what she said, that there are 519,000 local offices that are available for people to run for. And that's her focus, is training people to run for local office. So with that, we'll get started.
And get off your phone, Bonnie. Okay.
Oh, let me just remind you to please turn off your cell phone.
Oh, right. Okay, hold on. Okay. Yeah. No, I like to check the CWA Twitter to see what panels are tweeting and stuff. So sometimes I just retweet that. And then when I retweet CU Boulder, I get all nostalgic. Because when I went here, I remember a professor telling me that internet thing's a fad. And I was like, he's probably not here anymore. I'm not going to name names. But we put the Campus Press, which was our newspaper. I don't know if they're still in the basement, but that's where we produced the Campus Press newspaper. And we were one of the first, I think we may have been the first college, let's say MIT was, because they always beat us for everything tech, but one of the first colleges to put the newspaper online. If you watch the show Halt, Catch, Fire, I'm third season. So the way the internet was created, so just think 90s. 1990s, not 1890s. I'm not that old. And then KUCB was one of the first online radio stations, college on I think KPIG out of California, which is alternative, like public access or whatever, they were first. And then CU was, KUCB was, and KUCB was in the basement too. I don't know why all my awesome experiences were in basements, but yeah, the radio station and college paper were there. So if you're in high school, or maybe middle school has papers too. So if you're in middle school, high school, college, I highly recommend working for journalism area, like paper or radio station, whether that's your field or not, because you find your tribe and you learn how to work with other people, which is, I guess, a good segue to I'm not bossy, I'm the boss. Here's the thing. I know that Cheryl and Sinead, lovely ladies, I love them both, want to get rid of the word bossy. I'm okay with it because I'm a big fan of taking back derogatory terms to women, and then we steal it back and make it awesome and then throw it back in everyone else's faces and go, screw you. I don't know. I'm a little aggressive. Here's the thing I hate more than the bossy term. I'm okay with being bossy. What I hate in corporate America or the entertainment industry and the tech industry where I'm in most, tech and entertainment, is when they call me emotional. Oh, you want to see emotional? Call me emotional. What I hate is guys are less emotional than me, but they're jerks, and they're called passionate, or they're called leaders, or they're called, you know what I mean? So to me, it's not about bossy, it's about emotional. And that drives me crazy because, look, it shouldn't be about gender. There are jerks in both genders, whatever you identify gender-wise. Let's just say there's jerks everywhere. And there's people that are going to be hard to work with no matter where you're at. And that shouldn't be a gender issue. That shouldn't be because I want things done a certain way, I'm bossy. That just means I want things done a certain way. And guys do that too. But why are we called bossy? Why are we called emotional? Why are we called tough to handle, hard to handle? Before this, I don't really do prep for panels because I like to be a bit more spontaneous. I do stand-up comedy, and the worst thing you can do to a comedian is say, hey, do you have notes? Like that, no. And also, just by how I am, I like to just kind of talk on the cuff to see what the audience is wanting to do and the panelists are going. But I feel, and of course I lost my train of thought. I think when you get these terms thrown at you, it's hard because you want to succeed in business, and especially if you're the boss, if you're the one that's running a company or a startup, or even if it's not business related, if you start your own improv group or a book club or whatever, but you're in charge, there's an element of when you're in charge, the main thing you have to do is keep people focused, keep them energized, praise them, don't just criticize them, like celebrate their successes, but also you're there to keep things on track, right? But when I was looking, the only preparation I did for this panel is I keep my old performance reviews from different companies I worked at, just to go back and see, how did they describe me? And every single one was pushy. I know it's hard to believe. Pushy. Doesn't know when to stop talking was another one, which, right? I always think of these things as good things. I don't know. Like when I was a kid and the teacher would write things on the teacher, like things to improve, it was still the same things. It was pushy, does know when to stop talking, center of attention. There was a year when I talked with a puppet instead of me because I was experimenting. By the way, if you ever have a boring board meeting, just talk through a puppet. That'll wake them up. That wakes them up. Especially if it's an Excel spreadsheet presentation, just have the puppet present it. That wakes them up real quick. That also alerts HR, but still. So I was looking through these old performance reviews, and all my bosses have been men, all of them in the entertainment industry. That's changing. But they were all like pushy, interrupts during meetings. Like it was these things. And then I was like, okay, so I looked at one of my friends who was a guy, equal position, and I looked at his performance review. And in areas where he was praised, it was takes initiative. That's pushy, by the way. This is all just different verbiage, right? Takes initiative, knows takes command of a meeting was my favorite. I'm like, yeah, that's called interrupting your boss. Like I do that all. And so has great new ideas, which by the way, when you're a woman, and especially in tech, this happens a lot, where it's like you say something in a meeting and then no one says anything. And then like 3 seconds later, a guy says the same exact thing. And then all the guys are like, that's a great idea. And you're like, wait a minute. Wait, hey, over here. And it happens every single time. And when you say, hey, over here, that's when you get needy written on your performance review because you're like reminding them that that idea was actually my idea. What's going on here? It happens, and it still happens. I mean, I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy here, but this is one of the reasons I'm like, you know what? And by the way, George Lucas never did this because he's never in meetings. So George Lucas treated everyone like equals at Lucasfilm. I think it's because he could never remember where we worked or our names or what. Yeah, so we could be an intern or an exec. He would never know because the age range. And he was a great boss because if you had a great idea, he'd listen. He doesn't care who you are. If you have a great idea, that's what you were defined by. I worked for Stan Lee at Marvel, same thing. I worked for Hugh Hefner at Playboy, same thing. If you had a great idea, they're all ears. So there wasn't that weird. The sexism I had to deal with were guys that were younger than me. And I don't know why that is, but it was like all of a sudden that was like, oh, blah, 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 and I don't get it. But the reason when all that stuff started happening, I'm like, I'm really tired of having great ideas and having the guy that's my junior repeat it and get promoted over me, and then he's my boss. And now all of a sudden, all my bosses are guys that are 10 to 15 younger than me and condescending me in meetings. So that's when I was like, screw it, I'm going freelance. And freelance is a great way of saying you're the boss, because you are. And I'm not going to tell myself I'm bossy. I give myself performance reviews every year because I think you do need to do self-evaluation. And when I write, takes initiative, right? Commands a meeting. I mean, that means I talk to myself a lot. So I don't know if that's a cry for help, really. No, I think this is a cry for help. Is this a cry for help meeting? When you are your own boss, you really start looking at, okay, how am I as a boss? So I'm a freelance, so I work by myself, but I have writing partners. I'm getting into TV writing right now. So I have to deal with, working with someone. As a comic, sometimes when you do improv, that means group project, and you have to know how to delegate responsibility, but also how to listen and how to let people have their own ideas. And it's like that yes and type thing. I know we make fun of improv people all the time, but that yes and is great unless don't use it in dating, but yes and is great for everything else. So I know there's little kids here. I don't know. You're not little kids. You know everything. So the I'm not bossy thing, again, I know we're not supposed to use that as derogatory, but again, I don't think it is. I think as long as you know who you are and you're smart enough to know a good idea when you see it and give praise where it needs to be, but also keep things on track. Everyone's going to be working with each other. Whether you're freelance or not, you still have to work with each other until robots take over in like 5 years. But you need to and even then, you're going to have to work with those guys. And women. I don't even know what the gender equation is going to be for robots. Different panel. But as a boss, to me, it's like a big deal of knowing a great idea, praising the people that you work with, but also knowing when maybe you should quit a company and be the boss yourself. I'm totally rambling, but was that enough time? Was that good? Okay, cool. Now the professionals will speak.
I love you. I love you all. This is great. Thank you so much for welcoming us. This has been an amazing experience, and we definitely should talk because I worked in TV production for years in the room with the writers, surrounded by 13 men and maybe 2 women. Okay, and this was I'm going to go ahead and say this and risk telling you my age. Be easy. This was in the early 2000s. And I sat in the rooms with people like Norman Lear, Bill Cosby, a lot of people, a lot of people that you know. And I did it. I went out to LA, and I will say that I had already had a little bit of a career up until then, but I went out to LA to sort of find myself, right? We're always trying to find ourselves. Meanwhile, it's like, here I am. But I went out to find myself, and Norman Lear was actually the first person in Hollywood to say, okay, you're different, right? You're different. And that person, whoever that person may be, and I've had a few of them in my life, you will have a few people in your life who will say to you, you got something. It might be a man, it might be a woman, it might be an alien. You take it for what it's worth, right? It's a good thing to hear that. You just have to know what it means and what you want to do with it. But sitting in the room with writers and being the only black woman in that position at that time, when there weren't a lot of black people in the rooms, really, it's a boys' club. It's a good old boys' club, right? I actually had people who would look at my resume, and I worked at all of the studios. I worked with I did the first TV show out of DreamWorks. I sat in a room with Spielberg and Katzenberg, and again, the only black person. And I had people say to me, other women say, I looked at your resume and I thought you were a guy. And it's not just because your name is Charlie, but look at the rooms you've sat in. How did you get into these rooms with these powerful men who only let other powerful men in the room? And I will say this to young people, because I know older people, we sort of begin to understand this, is that as you live life, your life begins to talk back at you. And you begin to realize the parts of yourself that have been there that you didn't know, that are there. So I kept hearing from people, you're getting into these rooms and you're dealing with these men, and for some reason you're able to, what is it? And I began to ask, well, yeah, I don't know. I just do what I do. I'm going to tell you something. I had a boss who told me one time, she was a woman in a law firm. I spent 10 years in corporate law. Please. Wait, in New York City, please. Okay, at the biggest law firms, please. Okay, so, yeah, I've done hard time. But I had a boss who said to me, I will never, again, one of those people in my life who pointed something out that I didn't really know, but that now I can embrace, which goes along the line of being bossy. She said, Charlie, you're a type A. And I said, what, you calling me an asshole? So what's going on here? Your human resources. And she said, no. And when I looked it up and I said, wait a minute, I'm not a type A. I was offended immediately that I was being called a type A without even fully understanding what that was. And that in and of itself culturally says a lot, right? Because I said, that means I'm bossy and that I'm a jerk and that I'm this and that I'm that. And I began to ask people around me, my fellow employees, I said, my coworkers, am I type A? And yeah, Charlie, yeah, you kind of are. And I said, but what does that mean? Like, I'm nice, and yeah, you're cool, you're funny. And I said, but then how does that make me pushy and an asshole and someone who would push the next person over? And they said, well, that's not really you, but you don't back down. And you fight, and it's sometimes exhausting. You get what you want, and you want what you get, and that's it. And so I says, okay. And again, at that time, I wasn't old enough and mature enough to understand what that meant or what to do with it. I had to live life a little longer, get kicked in my butt a few more times to know what to do with that. And it wasn't until I launched my own business that I learned what some of these things meant, right? So when I was 14, my mother gave me a challenge, and I say this to the junior high school kids because this is really important. I was told by my mother every year that I would have to go live with my aunt for the summer and her husband. Usually they traveled, and I would go and babysit their kids while they ran around and whatever. And so I was 14, and I felt like I don't have to do this anymore. I'm 14, And she said, well, then go get a job. If you can get a job for the summer, you don't have to go to your aunt's. And I took that challenge. And not only did I go get a job, but I got a job working in a bank. It's called the Amalgamated Bank here in New York City. I was 14 years old. They gave me a job working on their union accounts. They thought I was 18. All right. So whatever. Okay. Clearly this was before 9/11 and paperwork, right? But the point is, when I came back to my mother and I said, because what I did was I went into school and I said, I'm trying to get a job and I want to go to agencies and I want them to help me get a job. I went to the library and I did my homework and I said, I have to do a resume. And at that point, what kind of resume could I have? Well, I put some stuff on there. I had some stuff. And when I went in to these agencies at the age of 14 and said, I want you to get me a job, I can do this. And they were like, okay. And they sent me out to when I got that job, that first job, it was so empowering because I had a mother who was supportive, but I had people around me saying, you're only 14, kid. So you'll hear those voices too. You're only this. Don't listen to those voices. Don't listen to those voices, because if I had not done that, I don't believe that I would have been the person that I am today. I learned at that point that, number one, whatever rules that there are around me that says that I shouldn't do this and I can't do that, I can break them. And that adults don't really know what they're talking about always, you know what I mean? And that's okay. That I can define what I want and what I am, right? And what I want to be. So going back to the idea of bossy, when it became time for me after working in all of these industries to do what I wanted to do, which was eventually I did launch my own company, and it was a web video. This was 1 year after YouTube launched. Okay, I think I was just too early with my idea, but it was a web video. Yeah, it was a web video platform, and I was going to be big and do big things, and I was very arrogant. It's very arrogant, and that's okay because young people can be, arrogant. And I thought I'm going to kick ass because I do it in corporations. I was the one that people liked in the room because I opened my mouth. And I didn't apologize for what I had to say. And so when the managing partner said, hey, Charlie, what do you think? And sometimes the managing partner would say it almost as a joke, like, hey, what do you think, Charlie? Like, because I'm not even supposed to be in the meeting technically. But when I listened to them, our ability to listen to what other people are saying, and not just listen to what they're saying, but listen to what they're not saying and understand what needs to be said. And when you have the courage to say it, right? You first and foremost blow their minds, trust me. And then you might get the blowback, right? So once I got a taste of that and understanding that when I sit in these rooms with these powerful people and they ask my opinion and I give it and I don't apologize for it, and then I say, well, you asked me, what do you want? Ultimately it makes us all better, right? And that being challenged is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. And so when I came out on my own with my first startup and I got my butt kicked royally, I failed, and it was the most painful thing in the world. One of the most important things with regards to being bossy, the idea of being bossy or being a boss is embracing your vulnerabilities and understanding your weaknesses and knowing what to do when you fail. It's easy to be a boss when you're winning. It's hard as hell to be one when you fail. Trust me. And when I watched how my actions and what I did with my startup impacted the people who relied on me, these people that I was, who attached themselves to my dream of doing something, and that I let them down, I became so depressed. I saw a Charlie that I didn't know. Yes, I didn't feel like a boss. But what I've learned since then is that at that lowest point, because after that I became homeless, I had to redefine what it means to be a boss. And what my life was telling me was, you don't become a boss until you experience your loss, right? And when I went out into the streets and took just my laptop and, and thought that I was giving up, that's actually when I was fighting the most. And I met other entrepreneurs who were homeless in the streets. They had business cards. You would never know this. You would never know that they didn't have a place to live, that at night they were going into abandoned buildings to sleep or whatever. But during the day, we would go into, coffee shops. At 5 in the morning, I'm online trying to build websites for people, trying to get money, trying to hustle. And that's how I launched Surfresh Media, which is the parent company of Tech 2025. And I fought like hell and learned how to define really what it means to be a boss and what it means to embrace that type A, because that type A in the streets helped me to fight every day to get up and to get a little bit more money and to fight to tell my ideas in a new way. And so it defined for me, I don't mind being called bossy. It just made me aware of the fact that you can be a boss, but you also have to be aware of your own vulnerabilities and of how it's impacting people around you. And I think we tend to forget that. And it's not easy. It's not. But it's worth it. It is. But it's hard. So, and I will tell you this. The only other thing that I will say is that I had a situation, and this goes back to the whole idea of being vulnerable and defining what it means to be a boss. Now that I have Tech 2025, we do 4 events a month practically, like on average 3 to 4. We have great people like you come into the room. I make you guys talk about these emerging technologies. It's not about us. I want to hear what you're doing, what you think of AI. Where can we go with this? Where do you think we should go? And I had an event where we had people come into the event, and 2 of my assistants, 2 young women, at the end of the event came up to me and said, Charlie, there were these 2 guys in there who were leering at us. And I said, those 2 guys, I didn't know them. Who were they? And she said, we don't know. They came to the event. But they leered at us, and they made comments. And one of them actually said something to my assistant that was real out of pocket. And the first thing that I did, going back to my weakness, was I said to my 2 assistants, young girls who are 23 years old, I said, why didn't you tell me when it happened? Which was the wrong thing to say to them. It wasn't their fault that it happened. I wasn't blaming them, but I wanted to attack it in the moment. And I didn't realize that I didn't give them the tools and the support system and really the structure as a boss to know what to do in those instances. So I failed them. And then I contacted the company that brought those guys in there. And when I talked to that company, it was a young guy, and it's 30-something years tech. He was 30-something years old. And I said, let me tell you what these 2 freelancers who worked for you did in my company, at my event, to my 2 employees, and they're women. And this man who owns this company sort of blew it off and blew me off for a week and treated it like it was nothing. And I refused. I promised my two assistants, I said, I'm going to the end. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And this person who owns this company, 30-something years old, he's got $5 million in funding. He knows that this happened. He didn't want to do anything about it. And finally, I sent a tweet out. We've got ways to get our voices out there in a number of ways, people. This is an amazing time. And when I sent a tweet out that said, okay, so your company is okay with sexual harassment. Oh, wow. I got a call. But here's the funny thing. The call that I got, and this is really important to know, I got a call from a woman in the company who's a CMO. She was technically the CMO. She was 26. And she said, Charlie, they don't know that I'm calling you. She says, I'm 26. I'm mortified by what's been happening and how he, the man, the owner of the company, has treated you and has not taken this sexual harassment seriously. She said, just so you know, both men and women in this company were disgusted. She says, and I'm demoralized. And I talked to her for an hour, and she was almost in tears. She says, I don't know what to do. I've worked for so many tech companies, and I'm treated like I don't have a brain. Yeah. And I said to her, you're gonna take off and you're gonna do your own thing. It's gonna be amazing. And literally, I sent him an email that next day and said, let me tell you what you are. And I ran him down a list of them. I said, don't you ever contact me. And I copied everybody in the company. And then a week later, she emailed me and said, I quit my job and I launched my own company. Cool. Yeah. She's a boss.
Hi, I'm Erin Velarde. I'm the founder of Vote, Run, Lead, and we train women to run for office and to win. And we specialize in local and state office all across the country. We had a 70% win rate last year. We trained over 10,000 women to run for office online and in person. And it's the sort of ultimate boss lady job, and I love it. And I meet amazing women who have, I think, various levels of the kind of boss muscle. Right? Some of us, probably the 3 of us, very much have just been born with the boss muscle fully flexed. I remember saying, no, I'll be sitting at the head of the table this Thanksgiving. And my dad was like, okay, go for it. And so there is just some of us, there's this sort of natural tendency to, participate in something. And I'm like, well, why am I going to participate? I should just be in charge. I don't want to be, student body treasurer. I want to be student body president. And so some of us just have that sort of tendency. For those folks, I think there's what does it mean to be a really effective, strong boss? For some of us, it's, the listening is really critical and looking at some of the skills when you come to sort of leadership naturally and making sure you're not steamrolling through, whatever endeavor you're taking on. For others, leadership and the sort of boss-like qualities are a muscle that we're going to have to build and exercise in order for it to grow and strengthen. And we live in a culture that, for girls and young women, continues to not provide those opportunities to flex that muscle, but also to diminish that capacity. So one, sort of zapping out when we're using language in a way that is derogatory. I agree, Bonnie, about sort of taking back the language of bossy. But what it comes down to is we don't use words like, he's so pushy. It just like sounds totally silly, right? Like, oh, he is just too nice, right? These are things we say about women in the workplace, things we say about women. Oh, he's so emotional. Like, that just sounds so silly. Like, you know, it doesn't, there's no way that these phrases ever get put on men as descriptors. And so it's both ways, right? We've got to make sure, and I love that hashtag flip the script. That actually does that. So when you see things like this, or when bosses say something like that to you, or managers say something like that to you, two ways to tackle it are to flip it back and say, you know, I feel that same way about John. He's just too nice and just too emotional. And it's using a little bit of humor, right? And the other thing to say when I was doing some coaching for women in the corporate sector is to ask that manager, how does this affect my bottom line? Could you explain to me how this affects my numbers or the results that I've been getting? Right? And that's a different way to tackle that, particularly when in your review process, when you're getting things that are not related actually to how you've been performing. You need to go in there armed with what your performance numbers are, and to be able to have both that sort of thick skin and thin skin. I don't want every elected official that we potentially train to have just thick skin. Part of the reason we want women in leadership is because we feel what's going on. We have an intuition, a gut that tells us, I don't know if it's like, you know, years and years of evolution around safety or where it comes from or what, but motherhood, that thing in our stomach where we know intuitively that this is the right way to go, the wrong way to go. And so I don't want everyone to have that ultra thick skin, but I want to know when we've got to kind of put on the shield of that thickness and when it's time to be that emotive. And that's some of the qualities that we're looking for, the sort of 21st century boss man or boss woman. All the research also, just for the record, says that women are better bosses than men. You can look, I think the latest Gallup poll from 2017 looked at like 27 million employees across the world, or some insane number that is totally statistically sound. Harvard Business Review, and I think it's 9 out of the 10 leadership qualities. Women do both better on competencies and in skills. Employees, both male and female employees, say that women as bosses are better at engaging them at their jobs, and thus their performance increases. Also increases loyalty to the company. And so we know that there is a desire for a new model of leadership inside our companies and inside our government, and that the qualities that women are bringing to the table, often qualities that we've had to develop outside traditional leadership structures. So qualities we've had to build where we've been at the foot of the table are now required at the head of the table. So the world is more relational, social media, social networks. We're no longer looking at that hierarchical, you know, the military is one of the last places that true hierarchical structure is in place. Our corporations and our government are moving towards more flat structures. So the research is there to say that it's not that when you get to be a boss, we want you to transform into this robot of, you know, a 1950s, you know, Mad Men kind of leadership style. Right. We actually want the skills that have allowed you to propel to be the skills that you're bringing to the leadership table. The other thing I want to add about the sort of boss muscle is that it's, you know, there's some qualities that are actually not that fun about being a boss. And I think both of your stories have really shared some of the tough decisions, the risk-taking that has to be done, knowing that you have other folks' livelihoods depending on your strategies, and some of the skills that go into dealing with conflict, right? The buck stops with you when you're the boss. And so for some of us, particularly for young women, we have this tendency to not embrace conflict. That it's like, okay, we're just going to figure this out, we're going to talk it through, or we're going to act like that really wasn't a big deal, when really it was a big deal. So the embracing of conflict now is one of those skills that you will need if you want to succeed, especially in a leadership or be the boss of your own company, of your own life. Because at the end of the day, you're usually the last person to deal with that conflict. So really thinking through what that strategy means for you about how you understand conflict, it's going to make you feel not so good. right? If conflict didn't feel that good, we'd all be fighting all the time, right? There's a reason that conflict makes our body actually physically feel uncomfortable, because we do want to resolve it, right? There's sort of science behind some of that. Thinking about one of the other qualities around being a boss is someone who sets a vision. So when you're in charge, what you're saying is that I see something in the future that nobody else sees. And I'm going to put together the resources, whether it be people, time, managing money, managing the capacity that we have to make that vision a reality at a healthy pace. And they're trusting you that you are able to sort of see and set that vision and communicate that vision. And then it is really that engagement. One of the best books that I've seen, and I'm reading it right now because I'm not doing this at my current boss lady job, is called Multiplier. And this is where you are coming into a room and you're not taking over the whole room saying, like, I know everything. I'm going to hop into the staff meeting. I'm going to set the agenda for the week. I'm going to tell everybody their tasks, and then everyone's going to go along their way. Really good bosses go into a room with their peers, with their subordinates, and are able to multiply the amount of genius that's in that room. They're able to help those people who are in the room do the best that they can do by not always giving them the answer. And I have this problem. I still have this problem. I've had this problem since I was a kid, which was just like, okay, I know the answer. I'm just going to say the answer, right? I'm not even going to, if I'm not getting picked or somebody doesn't get it correct, I'm like, wrong, right? So it's that, a part of it is that strive towards perfectionism that we are teaching girls, right? But it's also partly saying, how do I create an environment for this other person to thrive, for this other person to be this sort of like full beaming light bulb, right? I don't want to go on and I don't want to be the person who's like turning everyone light bulb on. I want to give them the tools to turn their own light bulbs on. And this book, Multiplier, is one of those things that sort of really helps the best bosses do that kind of stuff. So you can be the boss, you could have nobody following you, you could still be the boss. Right? Or you could be the boss that has a really loyal and trusting following who knows that when conflict arises, you're going to be treating others fairly, knows that there's a high level of engagement. You're going to get the returns around loyalty. They're going to work harder and smarter for you. And you're going to create a bunch of other bosses who feel empowered then to take the experiences that they've had with you and go off and either run for office, start their own company, take the next step in their leadership. And I know, and the research says that's what women are really bringing to the current culture of business, to the private sector, and to government. We are more likely to, in our decision-making style, take the experiences and expertise of a lot of different people, many of whom don't always agree with us. Now, traditionally, that actually looked weak prior to sort of last decade on women's leadership, where I would ask a bunch of people, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And it would feel like women couldn't make a decision, right? But instead, that what we're actually doing is kind of getting a full scan of the community and finding out how much information is needed to make a really sound decision, right? Being a good boss means sometimes you're only going to get 66 or 22% of the information, and you still need to pull the trigger. You still need to actually make that decision. And I think that's some of the times where we get a little bit tripped up, and you need to hold on to your decision. Doesn't mean that as more information comes in, you can't, change your mind, but it means that you are that person who is setting the course. So depending on the amount of information that you have, the time that you have to make that call, you have to be the person that's able to take that responsibility and make that decision. The other area where actually men and women, more men than women, don't see women as better leaders in the Harvard Business Review research is around vision. And I think that has more to do with sexism, actually, than women setting a vision. So even though a lot of the research is still talking about the competencies and skills of women leaders as bosses, there are still some tendencies in the way that women see the world and men see the world that it's not translating just yet. So I hope we'll talk a little bit about this, and I'm excited to connect with you all. I think.
Thank you all. That was a great start and some really interesting observations. I have a question to sort of move the conversation along, but again, I'm gonna tell people I only have a couple of questions so far. So we're taking questions both through the CWA app, and if you raise your hand, you can get a question from our note card from our producer here. To ask a question in the app, you simply select this session in the schedule, you tap Q&A, and then you insert and send your question. If you're a student, please note this, and I would love to I got another group of students that came in. I'm delighted to have the students here. I'd love to get your questions. Make your questions brief and to the point. I've also been asked to read this plea that before we turn to audience questions, we would like to quickly mention that this is the CWA's 70th year crowdfunding campaign. To celebrate the 70th year, we've set a goal to raise $70,000. We're 1/4 of the way to our goal, and we would appreciate your support. Any amount helps. You can give by selecting the donate button in your app or visiting the CWA website. So my question, just quickly before we move on to some audience questions and to let people get to those questions, is to go back to the title here and where it came from, the I'm Not Bossy, I'm the Boss, that it is kind of a movement that Sheryl Sandberg, there was an ad that was put out by Sheryl Sandberg, Beyonce was in it, Condoleezza Rice, and it's basically saying, it's about teaching our kids and saying that calling someone bossy, which is typically something that girls are called, as you've mentioned, is a squasher. You know, it's derogatory, and they're saying let's ban the word bossy. It's not helpful. Then I've seen other people who say that, you know, on the other hand, this. You know, we're sheltering our kids by doing that. Mm-hmm. It's a tough world, and people need to learn to sort of move through that and you know, deal with the fact that some people don't like you or may say things like that. So if you could just speak briefly to that, I'd appreciate it.
If you want somebody to do something, ban it. I mean, I think we know as a society, banning doesn't do anything. Banning doesn't work, ever. I remember I would get the banned books list as a kid and just read them all because you weren't supposed to. I remember when Judy Blume had books that she's a young adult author, and she is a great author. If you have not read any Judy Blume books, I highly recommend them. They're in your library, I'm sure, or digitally or however you read stuff. And those books weren't allowed in my school library because they talked about divorce. I know this is going to sound super quaint right now, but it talked about divorce, and it talked about menstruation, and it talked about girl-on-girl hate, and it talked about bullying, and it talked about, I mean, it wasn't banned for those. It was banned for mostly bad words, mostly because they talked about sex, and apparently you're not supposed to talk about sex until you have it. And also, I know all these kids are like, I have so much I'm going to tell my parents when I get home. And anyway, these books were banned. That book was passed around like it was, you know, contraband at my school, but it was kind of cool because it was like this book, and it was for our age group. We weren't reading Marquis de Sade. Don't look that up. We weren't reading porn. You know, it was just a kid's book that talked about real things that happen to kids. But some of those parents at that time were a little skittish, you know, and they wanted to keep their kids. And I get that. But this is reality, and banning words is so stupid because then everyone's going to use that word. Just like telling kids not to swear, yeah, they're going to swear. I mean, it's just life. And so telling me not to use the word bossy because it's derogatory, I get it. But if we reclaim it, take it, and throw it back, then it's empowering. And I think everyone in every culture has a word that's a no-no word that's been done that way, right? Whether it's race issue, feminism, gay rights, we've all taken those words that were used against us, and we made it something that's our community, and we take it back and throw it back in your face and go, this is why we exist. We're here. We're not going anywhere, and we're going to take this word back. So to ban the word bossy seems silly to me. It's just, let's call dudes bossy, or let's just all use it as a positive on our HR and report cards and like our reports about us, and say it's okay to be bossy. You know, what's not okay is to be condescending. What's not okay is to be sexist or racist or homophobic or ageist. What's not okay is to basically put us down for who we are internally, put us down for things that are not put us down, but criticize us for things that hamper the workplace, that stop open flow of dialogue, that stop ideas. Don't just say, oh, she's pushy, she's bossy, emotionally, whatever. So for me, bossy's okay. I'm okay with that. But I was like, my favorite cartoon characters were bossy. My favorite, like whether it was Charlie Brown or Rugrats, or my favorite superheroes are bossy women. Jessica Jones is my favorite superhero character because she's bossy, and she well, it's probably not a good lesson for those kids, but she drinks hard, and she has sex with whoever she wants, and she takes the cases she wants, and she beats dudes up. Like, those are probably not good lessons. I am a horrible teacher. Just tune me out when I'm talking. Just say she's wearing a cool Spider-Man shirt and just focus on that. No. This is good. You need to know this is real life. That's real life stuff. You're going to be there. You're there already. Bossy's okay. Bossy's okay. And banning things is never the solution, because as inherently, whenever we see, oh, that's banned, oh, don't do that, blah, 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 we investigate more and we find out whether or not that's what we want to do. So I'm just against that sort of banning. I think it's better take things that are used as insults against you, grab it, make it your own thing, make it that makes you powerful, and just throw it back at them and say, no, this is who I am. I'm not going anywhere. And, if you don't like that word, tough, because we just took it back.
I have a love-hate relationship with Sheryl Sandberg, not a love-hate, because I do love her. I do love her more than, but I think reading the book Lean In, when Lean In came out, I was at Barnard College working on putting together all of the latest research on women's leadership. And I'm sure the academic that got paid a lot more than I did to do the research and had essentially wrote the first chapter of Lean In, which was all of the great research on women's leadership, an academic by Michelle, whose last name is escaping me, out in California. Beautiful chapter on all the research on women's leadership. And then to see the rest of the book, I think, go in a direction that felt like, okay, individual women need to do more individual action, felt really thin. It felt like it was a really kind of thin strategy. It was a strategy, I would call it actually a tactic more than I would call it a strategy. And I think that's what this sort of ban bossy, it's a thin tactic. Like, yes, when you're on the playground and some other kid calls your kid bossy, it's like, no. Right? Like that, of course you want to call that out. But the larger sort of system that this fits within is that this is little girls trying to have some autonomy and control over a situation, and we're telling them that that's not okay. Right? And what that leads into is a lack of autonomy and control over your own body, the way you walk in the world, how you lead. And so that, I agree, and that we sort of take this back. And so I ban bossy, although it sounds cute, it's actually just one of the maybe tactical ways that we should be addressing this, but it doesn't actually sort of root at that systemic thing. And the systemic thing that ends up happening later on is women struggle with likability versus respectability. Right? That if we're not both liked and respected, we cannot be affected, that we have to have both. And actually, likability comes before the being respected for women, unfortunately. Whereas men don't have to be liked, but sort of demand that respect. And that's the result that we've had by generations of telling women, young girls not to be bossy, right? Is we've ended up with this sort of dynamic that says men can behave in a way that is aggressive, that is controlling, that is autonomous, that plows through, but can still be respected. And women somehow have to walk this tightrope of accounting for everyone else's feelings, making sure that the dynamic in the room is sort of settled and happy and everybody's okay. Then we get to be in charge and sort of push our agenda. And that's why I think just the ban bossy strategy tactic, isn't enough. We need to be saying, it doesn't matter that we really don't like boss X named Sarah, or that sometimes Charlie drives me crazy, or Aaron, comes into a room and does X, Y, Z. I don't have to like my boss every day. And we don't have to get that feeling back from our colleagues and our subordinates that we're liked. That's been put on us. Sometimes it's like, I know you don't like me, and I don't care. You still have to do your job. And this is why, because I've set the vision for the larger thing that we're doing. I've brought you into the process. We can talk about how you'll have more buy-in and what this means for the company. But right now, I need you to do the job that I'm paying you to do, right? And then we'll resolve this after the thing that we are accomplishing together, whether it's an event. There's nothing that sort of moves the likability thing past the ball than a really successful event or than a really successful win for your company or for your organization. Of course it's going to be hard. If you thought this was going to be all petals and roses, then you should run a flower shop, which is also equally hard, right? So this idea that we're always going to be liked, and on the campaign trail, this is really hard for women. What happens on the campaign trail is we end up going to talk to voters who are never going to vote for us anyway. I'm like, they hate you. Why are you spending your time with them, right? When we're looking at the math of getting voted, you need half the voters plus one. So if this group of voters over here is probably never going to like you or like your platform or you personally, you're not going to win them over with your charm and wit and your home-baked cookies, right? You got to go with the folks and the teams who are going to be able to have complicated relationships with you and are going to be able to respect you, even though some days you're coming in a hot mess and you're not treating everybody, super lovely all the time, right? It's that desire to be the team, to get things done, to know that in the long run, you're the boss that they can trust.
So true. Oh my God, that's amazing. Wow. So ditto to everything that these two amazing women just said. I couldn't agree more. And going back to what you were saying about being respected, it is so true, especially when you're a boss and you have your own company or you're freelancing. I've never really, I hate to say this, it's true, I never cared about whether someone liked me or not. And ironically, I think I'm pretty likable. I do okay. But at the times in my life when I've heard that they don't like me, I'm like, okay, look, whatever. Let's just keep this moving. But the funny thing about that is that you are absolutely right. Men do not have that concern that women have as much. They want to be they demand to be respected. Like is a possibility, but it's not a necessity to get things done. And because of that, they aren't as beholden to being defined by language the way women are, I think. Part of the problem, I think, is that we're beholden as women a lot of times to being defined by society and language in ways that men aren't. Because of there's a number of reasons for that. But we want to be liked. We don't want to have to fight all the time. But when men do it, when men sort of demand the respect, they get to also define the language too, right? Because they're not beholden to it. So I always think that, and this is just my feeling, when I hear that someone or some system or anything is trying to ban something else, the basis of banning anything is fear. It's fear. No one bans something because they feel secure or because they're like happy or there's that. The basis of it is always a fear that if we do not keep this thing from getting out, we are going to lose something. And a lot of times, if you're the target of that banning or if somebody is putting that ban on you, it's because you embody the very thing that they feared the most. And so when we go into these companies and we have these labels put on us, these titles and everything, or we have like a Sheryl Sandberg who's using a phrase that we should, I just think I would love for us to, number one, begin to ask ourselves, why are we really banning these? What's at the basis of this? What are you afraid to let go of? Because that's what it is. It's ultimately it's a fear of letting go of something that you are ultimately going to have to let go of. Okay. Do I need to be beholden to whatever it is society is defining me as in this moment? Because it's going to change. If you let someone tell you what you are today, you'll be letting everyone tell you who you are for the rest of your life. Right? So I don't think that the idea of banning something or banning a word is, I not only do I think it's a bad idea, I think it's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I may wake up today and I may like being called bossy today. And then tomorrow I may be like, don't you ever in your life, okay? You want to take this outside? Okay. And I reserve that right. And I say that all the time. I reserve the right to be whatever I need to be in this moment or the next to get to where I need to go, as long as I don't hurt another person and hopefully as long as I can help them. Right. So that's it. I mean, it's just, it's not easy, but it's doable. No banning. Stop the banning.
That's great.
Ban the ban.
Ban the ban.
Ban the ban.
Ban the ban.
I have 2 or 3 questions here that kind of get to the same point, which is what advice do you have for young girls, and I would say for young people too, about starting their own company and being their own boss? And another way it's put is, how did you have enough courage to do that? And I would add that you all came out of jobs where you were probably doing quite well money-wise, which is that whole, golden handcuff thing. What advice would you give?
That's a good question. What would you give advice to young people about starting I mean, I didn't start a company, so to speak. I went freelance as a journalist and a writer. Also, here's the thing too. I don't think this gets told enough to young people. When you pick a career, you're going to change your career a lot. It may stay in the same field, like you may be in tech forever, or you may be entertainment or whatever, but you don't have to stay in that job forever. So whatever your startup or your company's going to be may be totally opposite of what you're into right now. So if let's say you're really into video games or whatever, and by the way, there's a zillion video game jobs. So when your parents say quit playing those video games, there's no jobs. Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot. And like remind them that you're going to help them pick out their retirement home. I'm serious. That'll get them thinking. Like, do they want to live in a hovel? Or do they want to live where Elon Musk's parents are going to be living? Like, you know what I mean? Like, remind them you're going to be making that executive decision at some point. And you should have money because retirement homes are not cheap. That was a horrible, your parents are going to hate me when you go home. No, my advice is if you're not finding, because when you're in a job, yes, you're there to pay, you're there to make money, right? You're there to further your career. But you're there to learn. You know, you're there to hopefully you find a mentor. Not Minotaur, that's different. Mentor. Hopefully you find a teacher. Hopefully you have, everyone has a great teacher in school, right? You always remember that one teacher, whether or not they taught you directly or you interacted with them in sports or after school stuff or whatever. But there's that one teacher always said, and you brought this up too, who said, you've got something, you're special. You're funny, or you're really, you really know how to make a cool robot, or you know how to command a presence, which is also a big deal, especially in politics too. I mean, you're going to have that teacher that says you're good at this, keep doing this, even though everyone says maybe not. In what you need to do when you're in a company is find that person, right? That's doing that same thing, that's mentoring you, that tells you this is good, this is not good, work on this, don't work on that, whatever. What I found is when I didn't have that person, or I was that person for everyone at the company, or I was no longer learning, that's when I was like, yeah, I need to leave and either go to a company where I can get that teacher again, or I need to start that company. I need to start that co-op or that nonprofit or that volunteer thing or that club or group or whatever. And I, like when everyone kept saying, oh, you're funny. Why don't you do stuff? You're funny, you're funny, you're funny. I was like, yeah, okay. And then I was like, well, why don't I start an improv group? Because every time I go to improv group now, when you're going to comedy, everyone wants to be on Saturday Night Live, or they want a sitcom or whatever. So everyone's using improv now because they realize all these successful actors came from improv. So sometimes these improv groups are like the worst possible thing ever because everyone thinks they're the next Will Ferrell or Amy Schumer or, Amy Poehler or Tina Fey or whatever. So it's all these people thinking they're the best. The whole point of improv is that it's a group. It's not, oh, we're just the background singers for you, Diana Ross. Like, it's a group, right? And so I couldn't find an improv group that I liked, so I just started one. I basically started an improv group with all the other people who got kicked out of improv. Right? And sometimes that happens in tech. Like a lot of the tech companies that are really big now were started by hackers, like in high school, that just didn't have like the focus to either stay in college or work within the system, so to speak. And so they're like, let's just start a collective and, start this tech company or let's whatever. And I think you'll know when you want to start your own company. If you start your own company from the get-go, that's pretty impressive. But I think you need to learn first of what works, what doesn't work, what you think you want to do, what you don't want to do, and then take all that information and start a company or start a startup or go freelance or what have you. But I do, it's funny, I remember I was at Lucasfilm for 10 years, which sounds like a lot because most of the entertainment, there's a lot of jumping in the entertainment world from company to company to company. And I remember when I left Lucasfilm, I'm like, oh, maybe I should stay because there's people there from like the 70s, from like ILM that were like hippies. Dennis Muren's been there forever. There's icons in the industry that have stayed. And I remember George telling a group of this. I wish he had said this at orientation because most companies have orientation of new employees. But he said, you really only need to be here 5 years. You're just going to learn what you're going to learn in 5 years, and then you should go start your own company or work for somebody different or something. And I think that's a good lesson, too, is you'll know when to leave. And also, you may just be fed up. You may be working for a company where no one's listening to you. And this goes for guys and girls. I don't want the dudes in the audience to be like, this is great, but what about me? I mean, this is you too. If you're fed up, if no one's listening to your ideas, if you feel like you've outgrown a place, don't stay there. Go somewhere where you can learn or start your own company. And there's no age requirement for that, by the way. There's a lot of startups I've seen in San Francisco that are started by really young kids. As long as you got a great idea and can have someone help you figure out funding and stuff, that's possible. That's a possibility. So for me, it was, to answer your question of when do you know or what's great advice for startup, it's learn what you got to learn, take it from different places. It doesn't have to be from companies. It can be from, another generation. It can be from stuff you read. It can go from seminars and stuff, like attending stuff like this. Hopefully you'll learn. And then you'll know to do start. And it's scary. And be okay with failing. Because your first startup, and we're not all Elon Musk here. Well, maybe that's a good thing. But, we're not all, you know what I mean? Like, geniuses know failing's part of the process. And sometimes failing is the best thing that can happen to you because it means you're going to learn something. And then you're going to be even more fearless, and then more fearless, and more fearless. Like, I always tell people, instead of looking at maybe Elon Musk or even Steve Jobs or the people that you think you need to look up to for experience of what it means to be fearless, I always tell everyone, look at drag queens because they're fearless. I mean, these are guys that are, they're dressing up like beautiful women, and they are singing, they are dancing, they are falling. RuPaul Drag Race is probably the best, business school ever. But I'm just saying, be okay with falling on your face and getting back up and doing a better performance next time, better company next time, whatever. So be okay with failing. That's my big thing. I watch drag queens. Yeah.
Anybody else want to answer that, or should we?
There's a couple things. When you're starting a company, you want to solve a problem. So in the social entrepreneurship, which I consider myself a social entrepreneur, is I'm solving a social ill. I'm seeing something in the world that I don't like, and I want to solve that social ill. For products, it's usually a pain point, where this thing where people are really frustrated by, this doesn't work, or I can't get this, whoever came up with increased font on the Kindle, these are things that are pain points, right? So what is it that's a pain point that could be made easier for people that they're going to pay more money for versus what they have right now? Or you are coming up with something that no one's ever heard of that you believe that once you put it out into the marketplace, everyone's going to want it. Who knew we needed to be connected socially online until we were all introduced to Facebook? And now we're all friends with people from high school, and we reunited, right? So make sure that you're solving something that's going to be of value to people. And usually it's of value to you. It could be an experience in your own life. And Bonnie shared something about money, which is really understanding that access to capital. And for lower income kids and for kids, whose parents are maybe not in the financial sector or don't have portfolios, our understanding of money between the haves and the have-nots in this country is really big. So if you're somebody who, maybe your parents or you don't have a good understanding of budgeting, of sort of finances, of how the market works, start to read those books. Start to look for a mentor who might help you to understand that most of the entrepreneurs that are successful because they have access to money, not because they have really great ideas. If you start to look up some of these really fancy entrepreneurs, it's her daddy gave her that money, right? So access to capital is one of the biggest make it or break it's for. You can have a fantastic idea, but if you don't have $5,000 or $25,000 to get you started, so having that understanding of money, who has money, getting comfortable asking for money. In the nonprofit and for-profit sector, you're asking for money all the time. You're asking for money for people to buy your product. You're asking for money for a donation. If anybody wants to donate to Vote Run Lead, you can go to voterunlead.org/donate. Right? You got to constantly be doing that kind of thing because the money is the fuel for your idea to be a reality. So you want to solve a problem, you want to understand money, and then I think the successful businesses that get off for young people too is knowing how to delegate. Because the DIY factor, especially for women, we tend actually in our social entrepreneurship and our business entrepreneurship to hire fewer people and to think that we can do it all. And then women experience burnout at higher rates. Men are actually better delegators than we are. And that's one of the things that both male and female subordinates say about their female bosses, that they hold too much on their own laps. So in thinking about starting your business as a young person, what is it that you're going to be really good at that you should be spending your time at? And what is that you may need a partner or somebody to help support you and that you can delegate to? All right.
So, Charlie, since you're about to talk, this question was addressed to you. Others could jump in. We're down to our last 3 minutes. So I'm going to address this to you, and if you have something to say on the last one, go. But what kind of tools can we build as bosses to give our staff the support to speak up in the moment?
Oh, I love that.
That's an easy question.
That's right. Yeah, thanks. Who asked
You've
that
got 3
question?
minutes, right?
All right, yeah. Oh, thanks. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay, what kind of tools can we give? Okay, and I love that you said that tools, because there's, depending on the company, depending on who you are, depending on your mission, depending on what you're doing, there are a number of tools, right? So there's no one right way. Understanding the value of what your building is to the people who are helping you to build it is crucial to understanding the tools that you need to have implemented that are going to help them the most. So you should not be, as a boss or as a founder of a company, creating tools and systems that are separate or outside of or away from the people that are going to be using it. You should be creating these tools and these systems with these people, right? So I think a lot of times we tend to think that we need to sort of, before I hire these people, I have to have this in place, I have to have this in place, and then we just execute it and everyone's going to love it. That's not really how that works, right? The tools that we use in-house, whether they be open discussions, suggestion boxes, social activities that help us to talk about things, whatever those tools are, there are tools that we can invest in as business owners, meaning professional services that can help us to help our employees to become more engaged and to be better listeners. I find that a lot of the problems that we have with regards to not being able to speak also has to do with us needing to listen better to each other. So that's a huge thing. Listening tools are huge. But you don't want to create these things in a vacuum, I don't think. I think what you want to do is listen to your employees first, and depending on the operation that you have, and I'll give you an example. So, for example, what I just told you, I turned on my 2 assistants who were awesome, and I said, why didn't you tell me in the moment when those 2 jerks were sexually harassing you that they were doing that? I mean, I was actually upset with them in that moment. When I calmed down, I apologized to them. I realized I did. I said, wait a minute, I'm being an asshole here. I realized that I had not given them the tools to do what they needed to do to speak up and to come to me. And this is something that bosses experience constantly. So you're always updating your repertoire of tools because you're always being challenged by your staff and your employees and your sometimes your clients to push the boundaries of what you think you are. So in that case, I realized, number one, I could have just had in place for my employees, what if this happens, right? A set of what if. I don't care what you want to call it, but if this happens, then this. And if this happens, then that. And then you come to me and this is, whatever that is. I didn't do that. I think the most important thing, too, is as bosses, and if you have a small company, if you have a startup, it's very important that you ask that question early on and that you bring someone in to help you also develop that, because you're not going to be able to understand, I don't think, 100% within your own ability necessarily what your tools need to be for your company. So I can't give a specific answer to that, but what I can say is, depending on what your company is, depending on who you are, number one, don't build those tools out without the help of your employees. Build them with your employees. Yeah. They are the most valuable. They'll tell you what they need. They're telling you every day. I just think sometimes we bosses, we don't hear it, and we and then also get that outside consultation coming in. Invest the money in getting the tools you need. It's worth it. Just pay the money to have someone come in also and help you guys.
Great. I am so sorry that we're out of time. That was an excellent panel.
Can I just add something real quick?
You bet.
It's not an answer. It's just, by the way, I'm assuming we're all easy to find online. So especially the younger generation, if you guys had questions or whatever, actually any generation, any of you guys, that was a bit ageist, and I'm like in my 40s. What am I doing here? Okay, so email us or tweet us or Facebook us or Instagram us, whatever everybody does, and ask us questions if you didn't get your question answered. I think we're all very accessible, and we would love to hear from you.
And in that regard, do you have a few minutes to stick around, or do you have to be somewhere else? Okay. If you have other questions, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Great job. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought so too. And are you friends with Sheriff, or are you?
No, I just
I don't have my first
I
name,
would
but I'll
say
follow
if you're
up.
a fan of Lehman, read her. I mean, it's her ghostwriter. I should Nell Stover. You got to come to the podium. Want to help her with her book?
You gotta come to the party on Friday.
Cool kids are, right?
Where the cool kids are.
Well,
Hey.
I'm in a technical institute, so it's like I always have to